The next component we're going to implement is the grid component. So earlier I told you that there are many places on this page where we need a 2-column grid. Here's one example. Here we have a 2-column grid. In the first column, we have the image. In the second column, we have some content. Here's another example. Once again, an image and some content. And one more time. So if we build this grid component, we can reuse it to build all these layouts. Now, this is the standard version of our design. If you look at the mobile version, you can see that we always have a single column grid. So back to our markup, we're going to add a div with the class of grid. Now we're going to have variations of this grid. We're going to have a 2-column grid, a 3-column grid, and so on. So we're going to add a second class, and we can call this grid, double hyphens. Now we can call the variation calls -2, or we can call it 1 times 2, like 1 row, 2 columns. Now you might argue that in a 2-column grid, if we have more than 2 items, a new row will be implicitly created. That's absolutely right. However, I personally like this convention more because I'm going to use this only for 1 row of elements. So 1 row, 2 columns. Now, if you don't like this convention, you can use calls -2. That's totally fine. So 1 times 2, we have this markup. Now in this div, only for this demo, I'm going to create 2 divs with different background colors, simulating different elements. So these divs can represent an image or this content over here. So back to our markup, we're going to add 2 divs. And for this demo only, I'm going to apply an inline style because we're going to throw these away. These divs are not going to be part of our component. Okay. So let's set the style to. First, I'm going to give them a height so we can see them. Otherwise, the height is 0. Then we're going to set the background. For the first one, I'm going to use gold. And for the second one, I'm going to use Dodger blue. Let's see what we have up to this point. So these elements are laid out vertically, and this is exactly what we want on mobile. Now, for 2-column grids, starting from tablets, we want to put them side by side. So here our style sheet. Let's define a new section called grids. First, we're going to define the rule for the grid class. And here we're going to set the display to grid. Now, for tablets, we're going to change the template of the grid to 2 columns. So here we write a media query and saying if the screen is wider than 768 pixels, this is kind of a standard breakpoint that a lot of frameworks like Bootstrap use. But again, these breakpoints are not set in stone. We can always change them when we build the final page. So for now, let's define a new rule here. Grid, double hyphens, 1 times 2. So this class only comes to existence for screens that are wider than 768 pixels, like tablets. Now, here we're going to set grid template columns to 1FR, 1FR. So we're going to take all the available space, divide it by 2, and then give each column 1 slice, okay? We could also rewrite this using the repeat function, repeat to 1FR. That's another way. Now let's see what we get. So on mobile, our items are laid out vertically. Now starting from tablets, they appear right next to each other. Great. So we're done with the 2-column grid. Now as an exercise, I want you to implement a 3-column grid. For 3-column grids, we want to put the items side by side only on wide screens, not tablets, not mobiles. So laptops and wider screens. So pause the video, do this exercise, then come back see my solution. All right, the implementation is super easy. We just have to duplicate this rule, then change the breakpoint to 1024 pixels. And we're going to call this class grid 1 by 3. Then we're going to change this to 3 columns. So on wide screens, our grid is going to have 3 columns, but on any screens that are below 1024 pixels, our grid is going to have only a single column. Now, back to our markup to test this. We're going to change this to 1 by 3. Then we're going to add another element and set the background to, let's say, tomato. So here's a mobile version. Now we get to tablet and then to wide screens. Great.